Hey, this is Steve. Before the podcast, I figured I should let you know that I'll be appearing on a podcasting panel at Heroes Con in Charlotte over Father's Day weekend this year, 2023. I hope to see you there. Now, enjoy the episode.
Hi, everybody. I'm Matt.
And I'm Steve.
And this is Marvel Reread Club. Hi, Steve. How are you?
I've been doing well, thank you. So, have you seen Guardians of the Galaxy Part 3?
I did. I was not crazy about it. I prefer 70s music to 90s music. I thought the animal stuff was too gruesome for my kids, so I saw it without them. I had been warned, don't take your kids to it. And indeed, when I saw it, I'm like, yeah, my kids would not have enjoyed this. They don't like gruesome animal experimentation. So I was disappointed in the movie. What did you think of the movie?
I actually quite enjoyed it. I tend to be more bothered by violence and horrible things happening to people than to animals in movies,
Right.
and especially when it comes to fiction. Nonfiction, not necessarily the same, but it doesn't affect me as much as it seems to affect most people. So that didn't really get me too much. It was in service of the story. I really loved the music. I especially loved when Introduce Yourself started playing, which is from the pre-Mike Patton Faith No More, which I was a super deep cut that I was absolutely there for. I thought it was an emotional movie. Obviously, it's the last James Gunn Guardians of the Galaxy we're ever going to get.
Yeah, I thought it was fine as an emotional conclusion. It worked on a certain emotional level. I just didn't think it was anywhere near as fun as the first two. I guess it wasn't trying to be as fun as the first two.
I can't believe that we actually got Counter Earth.
Yes.
Just once again, just how deep they're able to get into the Marvel mythos at this point is really astounding.
Yes, it is. It is amazing. And I did like Counter Earth.
Yes. So let's go ahead and get into what we're supposed to be getting into here. I believe you are first this month with Amazing Spider-Man, yes?
All right. This is a great issue of Amazing Spider-Man, issue number 26, The Man in the Crime Master's Mask. And this is a huge turning point. We had a sort of preview of it last month, and this month we are official. Stan Lee is off the pawning of this book. It's as stealthily scripted by Stan Lee, painstakingly plotted and drawn by Steve Ditko, according to the credits of the book, lovingly lettered by S. Rosen. So at this point, Stan Lee is no longer going to be credited as the plotter of this book for the remainder of Steve Ditko's run. He will go back to being credited as the plotter once John Romita takes over the penciling in about 12 issues. But first, we're going to have a good solid 12 issues here of Steve Ditko being credited on the page. And a lot of times when you have people going back and forth about how much writing credit should Stan have gotten, there's a lack of acknowledgement of this period. Like at one point, I was getting into a debate with somebody online. At the time, I gave more credit to Stan then than I do now. And I was saying, I was getting into it with somebody, and they're like, oh, well, I found a quote from Stan in which he says, the last year Ditko was on Spider-Man, I wasn't plotting the book at all. But that proves that, that Stan Lee never wrote anything. And I'm like, no, look at the credits. Look at the credits. He was giving Steve Ditko full plotting credit for that last year. Now, what people disagree on is this is where Steve Ditko took over the plotting, or this is just where he started demanding credit for the plotting. So we have the mystery of the Man in the Crime Master's Mask. Spider-Man still has no costume. He lost both of his costumes last issue. He searches for the one it may take away. He can't find it. Meanwhile, down by the docks, and Ditko has a great time drawing the docks.
Oh, yeah.
We have the Green Goblin meeting with a new supervillain called the Crime Master. Now, you pointed out online that the Crime Master really looks more than anybody like Rorschach.
Yes. Rorschach in Watchmen is famously based on Steve Ditko's Question character. His character certainly is, and his look is to a great extent, because the Question looks very much like this character as well. But this character looks undeniably more like Rorschach than the Question ever did.
Yes.
So, I just find that interesting.
Because he's wearing a brown suit, and he's got a little same sort of band on his hat, and he's got black and white on his face. We find out that the Green Goblin and this new guy, the Crime Master, have been going back and forth about who's going to take over crime in New York City, and at some one point trusted each other enough to exchange secret identities, so they each know who the other's secret identity is. But now they've sort of fallen out, and they're like, well, remember, I can expose you, and they're like, well, I can expose you, and so now they're both regretting having done that. We then cut to a bunch of crooks in a seedy hideout. Ditko does a great job with that. And then the Crime Master, that's the weird thing about the Crime Master is he has no powers and doesn't really have any gadgets. So he is climbing down the side of a building just with a big rope here and throws what looks like sort of a pumpkin bomb in through the window, but it's really just a note to the people saying that the Crime Master is going to take over. I think that the big problem with the Crime Master and the reason he would not ultimately be a character for the ages is that he doesn't really have a thing.
Right. I kept on wondering, how is it that the mobs are going to take this guy seriously as like, oh no, he's going to take us over when he doesn't have a gang of his own. He doesn't have any powers. I would think that at some point someone would just shoot him.
Yeah.
I mean, they're gangsters after all, but yeah.
So this is Ditko's first issue, getting full credit as Potter, and he really does a great job. This is a well-plotted issue. It's a very complexly plotted issue with this big fake out where they are trying to make us think that Frederick Foswell, when we first met him, he was working for the Daily Bugle, but he was secretly a crime boss called the Big Man. And then when we recorded our Big Man episode, I was like, oh, this is the Crime Master. And you said, no, this isn't the Crime Master. This is the Big Man. They're different. And I was forgetting then that one of the reasons I was getting them confused is that they at least first imply that they're both Frederick Foswell in disguise. So I don't know why they didn't just have the Big Man come back this issue. I would have just had this be the Big Man again instead of the Crime Master. It turns out to be a fake out. It turns out Frederick Foswell is not the Crime Master, but first we see that he has a secret hiding place in his hollowed out portion of his bedroom closet where he hides his special clothes. We will eventually find out that these are the clothes he wears when he wants to dress up as the underground informant Patch. But we're being tricked into the time into thinking this when he dresses up as a Crime Master. You pointed out that not only does the Crime Master look like Rorschach, but this looks exactly like the hidden chamber where the comedian keeps his clothes in the beginning of Watchmen.
Yeah, the very opening scene in Watchmen. It looks like it was once again inspired by this panel here.
Yes. So then Peter is home with Aunt May, can't find his thing, goes in to say hi to Betty at work. Betty is yelling at him. I saw you pointed out that Betty, if she straightened up, would be like twice as tall as Peter here. And
Yeah, she'd be at least a head taller than him, if not more, on page 5, the bottom left. Yeah, I think what I said was either Betty's a whole lot of woman, or Pete is actually Fancy Dan in disguise.
yes. Um, Shisha Jameson says, get the hell out of here. You don't have any photos to sell me. But then Pete is still suspecting Frischel, and he's like, I don't trust that guy. So he sticks a spider tracer in his hat. Pete then is at school. He's being hassled by Flash Thompson. He is finally had it, and they get into a big fight. They get in a big fist fight. Liz has to break it up and is disgusted with both of them. They get actually called into the principal by seemingly a black vice principal. Peter, being the stand-up guy he is, takes all blame for the fight. And then Flash, realizing this, decides to take the blame himself, also ultimately being a fairly stand-up guy. We get the Crime Master hassling various other crooks. We get J. Jonah Jameson at his club. We do not see Norman Osborn at the club this time like
No,
we
but
did
one
last
one
time.
thing we do see in the club, which struck me as aspirational, is that one of the folks in his fancy hoity-toity club is a black man on page 8, second from last panel in the background. And I know that this was the civil rights era. Society was getting somewhat more integrated, but I would really think that the highfalutin businessman's club would be one of the last places that this would happen. But you know what? Racial relations in the Marvel Universe have always seemed to be at least a little better than they are in the real world.
Yes. So then we get a really fun sequence where Spider-Man still has no costume at this point and it goes into a costume shop to buy their Spider-Man costume. And it turns out it doesn't quite fit and it's running up on the legs and on the sleeves and on the belly. Ditko has a fun time drawing that. And then he has to web it into place. He has to web his own costume onto him. And then it keeps coming off over the course of the book in a lot of fun ways. He is checking out Foswell's apartment when the crime master on a nearby rooftop sees him and shoots at him. This convinces him that Foswell is the crime master. He's wrong. They get in a big fight.
And that's a fantastic panel on the top right of page 11. With Spider-Man leaping out of the window across the alleyway there. It's a vertigo-inducing panel that I just love.
Are you saying it's vertiginous?
I guess it probably is, and it actually reminds me a little bit of one of the panels that I was attempting to draw in our old adventure newspaper comic strip thing that we were
Yes.
trying to do.
It reminds me of a panel. We did a 2-page Daredevil story at one point.
Oh, wow, yeah. I remember that.
Yeah, that looks like a
Yeah.
panel from your old 2-page Daredevil story.
Okay, maybe that's why it's jumping out at me. That's a
Yeah.
design that I tended to like when I was trying to be a penciler.
Yes, so then they get in a big fight, and Crime Master does have a little gas gun, so he's sort of got a gadget. Certainly successfully takes out Spider-Man, so he must have something going on. And they do the classic inconsequential confrontation, this is when I first noticed this on an issue of Batman and wrote it up in my blog a long time ago, where Batman was fighting the villain halfway through the story, and then the villain, knocked Batman out and Batman fell off the roof. And then when he got back up to the top of the roof, the villain was gone. This is the classic way of ending a fight inconclusively. And meanwhile, Spider Man's poor costume is riding up everywhere. And we can only imagine how uncomfortable that is. Spider Man then goes to Jameson hoping he still has the costume that he had, but he does not. And then he realizes everything is peeling off of him. And we have a
Yeah.
black police officer on page 16. Co was definitely trying to create a more diverse New York here.
Yeah.
Spider Man is back in Foswell's apartment. I'm never a big fan in these stories where someone has to search someone's apartment and then go back and search it again later. I always feel like efficient plotting eliminates needs to repeat locations. But various things conspire to fool Spider-Man into thinking that Foswell is the crime master. I'm not going to go through every plot turn in this issue because there are many of them. It's
Yeah.
very complexly plotted. Suffice it to say, there's a big meeting at the docks, a lot of crime. Both the Green Goblin and the crime master show up intending to take over the docks. Spider-Man shows up at the docks, gets in between the fight between the Green Goblin and the crime master, and does not come out well out of it. He gets knocked out by a pumpkin bomb. And then the Green Goblin is finally like, oh, he's knocked out. Let me see who he is. I'll take off his mask. But of course, and Spider-Man has webbed his own mask onto him because it was riding up, so Green Goblin can't get it off. Crime Master then goes into the meeting of the crooks and says, hey, everybody, I'm in charge now. And then who should come up behind him but Green Goblin, who has the unconscious Spider-Man, and says, all right, Crime Master, I'm speaking up. This is the Green Goblin saying that you're about to have the shortest reign on record. And that's it. That's our big
Yeah.
cliffhanger ending. I think this is a fantastic issue. It is very complexly plotted. I always love fake out stories where they set you up to think you know the solution to the mystery, and it's actually a fake out, and there's another solution. And I think this is a good two-parter that's good, that's well set up here, and it's going to be well paid off next issue. The noirish elements are just gorgeous. I
Oh,
like
yeah.
this issue a lot.
Yeah, no, this is a very well drawn, very well written issue. If this had been my first exposure to Ditko, I think I could have gotten past the out of fashion style that it had and really appreciated what this is.
Yeah.
This is Ditko at the height of his game. I mean, we are, and I think I mentioned this in a recent episode, we are really entering prime Silver Age Marvel here. I mean, we're getting to Ditko is at the very top of his game. Kirby is pretty much at the very top of his game. We're about to get Sinnot coming on Kirby, which just brings out everything great with him. And yeah, for the next couple of years here, we are just going to be having an embarrassment of riches when it comes to all this stuff.
But the most amazing thing about this issue is that we have an issue where Steve Ditko gets full punning credit, and Stanley at no point says it's a crappy issue. Not on the splash page, as he sometimes likes to do, not in the letter column. In the letter column, it says, even though you think you've got the whole thing figured out, we want to warn you, Stan and Steve are a lot trickier than you think, so don't be too quick to make the obvious deduction as to who the crime master really is. Same goes for Gabi, of course. Anyway, it'll all come out in the wash next issue. Till then, let's dip in the old Marvel mail sack. So there is not even the slightest hint of, sorry guys, that was a crappy issue.
Yeah, so just a couple other little things here. Where Spider-Man is in Jonah's office talking with him, there are a couple of panels where, to me, it really feels like Ditko kind of got in his own head here, art-wise, because there's a rule in dynamic figure drawing that the shoulders and the hips should never be parallel to each other. Because when they are, things look static, things look stiff, looks like somebody's just sort of sitting or standing at attention. So you always want them at least a little bit out of parallel. Well, in that scene, there are two separate panels where Steve Ditko kind of goes overboard with that, and Spider-Man just looked like he's got some sassy hips.
Yeah.
And so, yes, there was that. But, once again, a small complaint on this for a really fantastic issue. Once again, both art and story in this. I mean, just all the stuff at the docks is just fantastic.
Ditko
Yeah.
loves water. He always loves water, even to the extent where he had Doctor Strange splooshing through other dimensions, as you were pointing out.
Yeah.
The ripple effects in the water when they're at the docks are just gorgeous.
Yeah. Okay.
And I should point out that the letters column does have another letter from Steve Gerber, so he is still your own future writer. Steve Gerber is
Indeed.
continuing to show up here in the letters column.
Indeed. All right. I suppose that next we are moving on to Fantastic Four, the battle for the Baxter Building. So, this is the second part of an epic two-parter. Fantastic Four, The Battle of the Vaxxer Building, Doctor Doom, more diabolical, more deadly than ever before. We've still got Daredevil in this issue. Now, unfortunately, this is where Vince Colletta's interregnum is going to be joining us. And that's unfortunate, but this really is, I love this issue, though. There's some really great stuff in here, despite that. The splash page is fantastic. It's just one of those sort of evocative, sort of metaphorical splash pages, as it were.
Yes.
And it's just gorgeously executed. So, spellbinding script by Stan the Man Lee, astonishing artwork by Jack King Kirby, inked by V. Coletta, edited by Artie Simak. So if they started doing the, a Stan and Jack thing in a previous issue, because
They
if
like there were 2 books last month. There were 2 or 3 books last month where it just said, a story by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and was not saying who was writing and who was drawing, which eventually will become standard in about 2 years, I think. But that
yeah,
was just 2 issues last month, and I'm not sure they do it at all this month. I think they're giving just writing credit to Stan and art credit to Kirby. Like here, I think they do that on most of the books this month.
yeah. Where last we left off, Doctor Doom had taken over the Baxter Building. So that means that, among other things, the Fantastic Four, they don't have a base of operations, so they're on the run. They had also lost their superpowers due to a nuclear explosion from the Frightful Four. And Doctor Doom has access to all of Reed Richards' inventions and weapons. So the Fantastic Four are at a huge disadvantage. And that's really going to be the crux of the whole story here. So Doctor Doom uses some kind of flying TV camera thing to go and search through the city and find the Fantastic Four and Daredevil. Daredevil, as we talked about last month, has his billy club that he turns into a rifle,
Yes.
which wasn't what was in the billy club in the special cutaway we had last
No,
month.
it certainly was not.
No, but I mean, it's neat. And some people call out that on page 3, where he's putting this thing together, it looks like he's got a targeting sight on the thing. And, they're like, he's blind. Why does he need a targeting sight? And there are 2 plausible explanations as far as I can tell. One is he doesn't want people to know he's blind. So, but no, the one that I think is more likely is that Kirby was assuming that was like a flip cap that was there,
Ah,
and that Vince Coletta saw it as a scope and put the little crosshairs in. So, as someone who has been a comic book inker, I can say that certainly seems plausible. That this was just a miscommunication between Jack Kirby and Vince Coletta. There was an issue of Birds of Prey that I inked many years ago, where Black Canary was dressed up as a penguin henchwoman, and she had a little monocle on her face that was kind of just dashed in there. And I was like, okay, well, I'm the inker. I'm supposed to take this stuff and, make it look right. So I was like, okay, I'll clean this up. I'll, do this. And then the penciler partway through this whole thing was like, what are you doing? That was supposed to just be makeup, making it look like she had a monocle. And I'm like, okay, put a note in the margins, man. What are you? I'm just trying to do my job here. So, I'm thinking this might be a similar situation like that, but who knows? Daredevil says, okay, I'm going to go off and I'm going to try to take Doctor Doom's attention away from you. Meanwhile, apparently Johnny has stolen a taxi.
yeah, it's
uh
they seem to think that happened last issue or something, but it didn't. So it's somewhere between issues. Johnny has stolen someone's taxi. God knows where the poor
Yes.
taxi driver is.
Right. Well, they say commandeered, but commandeering is really just stealing when you think you're justified in doing so.
Right.
So they get to the Baxter Building. There's a huge police presence. The police have decided they're going to let the Fantastic Four go in and take it. So then at this point, we've got the interesting dynamic that the Fantastic Four know about all of the defenses and all of the weapons and all of the gadgetry that Doctor Doom has access to because they made it, but they don't have any superpowers. So it's an interesting balance of advantages and disadvantages here. But one of their advantages is Daredevil climbs up to the top and is able to go in and start fighting Doctor Doom on his own, which does indeed distract Doctor Doom from, like, say, the fact that the Fantastic Four get into the elevator and they're going up. They're like, oh man, Doctor Doom, why isn't Doctor Doom doing anything? Like, just seems like madness. Is he just playing with us? And, Mr. Fantastic's like, well, remember, Daredevil might be distracting him right now, which is indeed what's going on.
Top of page 7, just god awful Clutta inking on top of page 7, where all of their eyes are just black holes. There's not a smidgen of life in any of their 8 eyes on the top of page
Uh,
7.
the top of page 7 doesn't actually, that doesn't bother me at all. What bothers me is the bottom of page 7, that drawing of Daredevil in the bottom right hand corner.
Uh,
That's, that's a mess. Anyway, so Daredevil is fighting Doctor Doom. There's a lot of fun visual stuff here. There's fun visual stuff throughout the entire book,
there
honestly.
is.
But there's another gadget that Daredevil has in his cane that's just this little deflector shield thing. It looks like a tiny umbrella he's using to shield his face at one point. Doctor Doom finally gets around to doing something to the elevator right after the Fantastic Four get off. Mr. Fantastic splits off from the rest of the group because he needs to go find that gun that intensified their powers in a previous issue, because he's going to use it to reactivate their powers now.
So
And
this is my big problem with this issue.
uh-huh.
And they sort of explain this, but last issue they were like, our powers are gone. We are never getting them back. We are going to have to invent an electro vibra suit for Sue. We're going to have to give Ben a remote controlled thing. We're going to have to put Johnny in a flame suit. I'm going to have these long robotic servo arms. Our powers are gone. And in this issue, they're like, well, we just need to go and use the power revivifier ray that we were using when we were
Sorry,
fighting the
it's
scrolls,
referred to as the stimulator.
the stimulator, and then we'll be fine. And it's like, well, what about last issue? And somebody does eventually say, like, why didn't you mention last issue that gun could get our powers back? And he's like, oh, it was recharging. So I was going to these great lengths to replace our powers simply because that was just a stopgap measure until this gun that can restore our powers was finished recharging. It feels like, once again, a conflict between Lee and Kirby, and that Kirby is presenting these things to Lee as like, okay, this issue, there's no way they're going to get the powers back. This issue, they just have to get to the gun. And then Lee is like, but Kirby, you're not being consistent there. Like, this is, you did not set up this issue at all last issue.
Yeah.
And Lee having to smooth that over in the dialogue, and Kirby just being like, whatever. But I
Well,
don't know.
and
This is my big issue. My big issue with this issue.
I mean, that's part of the dynamic tension between these two that really created the magic. It has some side effects like what we're talking about here, but that's, Kirby can just sort of go wild, and then Stan can kind of clean it up and bring it into unison with the rest of this universe in the dialogue, essentially.
Yeah.
So they get their powers back. They're then fighting Doom. Of course, Doom is still formidable, so they're still in danger there. At one point, Doctor Doom freezes them all, but then Mr. Fantastic is able to get to some steam vent and set that off to melt them all. Doctor Doom gets out to another part of the Baxter building and sort of escapes out of here. And Reed, now this is a heartbreaking and morally dubious moment that is just
Yeah.
excruciating. So at the bottom of page 13, Reed has restored everyone's powers except Ben. And Reed says, now hold still, Ben. This is the last energy burst left. I don't want to miss. Ben is on his knees, weak, and he's saying, but maybe I don't want to become the thing again. I'm finally normal, like anyone else. And Reed says, you've no choice, old friend. With Doom still at large, we need all our fighting strength. There's too much at stake. So the first time that Reed turned Ben into a rock monster, it was a mistake. It was a miscalculation. It was a horrible, horrible mistake, but it was a mistake.
Yeah.
This time he did it on purpose, knowing exactly what he was doing.
Yeah.
And that's rough, man. I mean, we always talk about how Reed can be a real jerk, but this is another level. And okay, maybe they needed the thing, but I mean, come on. You guys are pretty resourceful. You could
Yeah.
probably do this without that. So, essentially, Reed took away Ben's chance at a normal life with Alicia. And Thing then goes ahead and takes out all of this rage and betrayal on Doctor Doom. And there's a fantastic multi-page fight scene with reversals and everything between the two of them. I noticed at one point on page 17, Doctor Doom is saying, "These are no more pebbles thing, they are intensified molecules." And there's actually a very similar panel in Tales to Astonish Thor story this month, which
Yes.
is just sort of like, oh, they're molecules. Well, that explains it. Wait, everything is molecules. Anyway, finally, the thing grabs Doctor Doom and he's got him dead to rights. And he crushes Doctor Doom's gauntleted hands and wrists. And it just looks like, his wrists must just be shattered inside there.
Yeah.
But then, Doom slinks off. Let's see, did they give a reason why they didn't stop Doom from leaving?
Ben's gonna keep attacking Doom, and then Reed says, "Remember, he's still the ruler of
Right.
Latveria, and as such, he has diplomatic immunity. But by defeating him so conclusively, you've broken his pride. It's the worst defeat he could have suffered, except for being actually defeated."
Right, right, right. And then there's the final couple of panels where Ben says, "Yeah, you got each other, but you ain't got me. Not anymore. I'm through being a fall guy for this combo. You divvy up the glamour, but me, I'm still the thing. I got the short end of the stick on this whole deal. You can get married, but not me. You can be normal, but not me. Well, I've had it. I'm through." And, they're all like, "Oh my God, he means it." And indeed, this is going to set up the rest of the Frightful Four storyline, which again is just one of my favorite storylines in this era, even though it's got some unfortunate inking on it. But this is just I love this issue. this is great. How about you?
I don't love it as much as you do. I think that I have included there. I like having Doctor Doom, but I'm never the biggest fan of Daredevil, and to like have this big Doom epic be also a Daredevil guest story, I think it's sort of a waste of Doom. But it's certainly a fun story, and there's lots of great Kirby pencils buried under the Cleta inks, and lots of great Kirby imagination, but also just completely zany Kirby imagination, like having Daredevil have a shotgun or a rifle or something hidden
No.
within his cane. Some of the things I liked on the splash page, they're like, "Destined to take its place beside the battles of Waterloo, Gettysburg, and Dunkirk. Here is the Battle of the Baxter Building." And I'm like, was Dunkirk really a great battle? It was more like a great skedaddle, wasn't it? It was like, we do not want to fight you on the beaches. We are going to take off. And then afterwards, Churchko was like, "Oh right, let's go and give a speech about how we're not going to do this again. Next time we're going to fight." But I love when we then cut to page 2 with Doom pointing his sci-fi gun out the window.
Mhm.
Is I guess it's not even a gun. I guess it's just a launcher for the drone. But I love the sci-fi gun or
Oh
sci-fi
yeah.
drone launcher he has in his hand
Yeah.
on page 2.
Well, just about
Yeah,
all the super science stuff in this issue is just gorgeous.
it is. Kirby is having a tremendous amount of fun. Whoever came up with the idea, whether it was Kirby or Lee, of like, okay, Doctor Doom has all of Reed Richards' gadgets. Kirby just ran with it, and it's
Yeah.
like, oh, that's great. I get to draw the Fantastic Four getting attacked by their own gadgets. That's going to be delightful, and plus whatever gadgets Doom brought with him. I feel like it's sort of a shame that last issue it seemed like a long time that the Fantastic Four didn't have their powers. I feel like the thing has turned back into Ben Grimm a surprising number of times in these first 40 issues. Have we ever seen him actually go to Alicia while he's Ben Grimm and say, "Hey, Alicia, it's me. I'm Ben Grimm."
I think we have, and the way that the writers have written it at various points when that's happened is she does not seem to love Ben Grimm the way that she loves the thing.
I don't think we've had that yet. I think that happens later. I feel like this would have been a good time to go ahead and see what she thinks of Ben Grimm, but they
Yeah,
didn't do it. And now we are done. But my big problem with this issue is just that the completely insolvable problem of not having their powers last issue seems easily solvable this issue if only they had not been locked out of their own building. And the disconnect between the two issues, I think each issue works just fine. I think last issue with them coming up with clever solutions to not having their problems is fine. And this issue going like, oh, we need to make it back to the Baxter building in order to do our revivifying gun. And it does help that the revivifying gun was something that was set up in a previous issue. So we know they own this thing, and that's not like a Deus Ex Machina. That's something where it's like, yes, use that thing that did that in that previous issue. I just
right.
don't like the disconnect between the two issues where it seemed so impossible last issue and so easy this issue.
Sure. I see that entirely. Yep.
It's certainly a beautiful issue, and we're
And
going
it,
to have
and an
several.
emotionally powerful issue in
Yeah,
my
an emotionally
my
powerful issue. I
opinion.
agree. Yeah, and sets up the next couple issues nicely, and then Sonat's coming.
Yep, as is Galactus.
Yes.
Sinnot brings the Silver Surfer and Galactus with him, basically, is what it seems like. Okay, great issue, but we have spent enough time on it. So now let's go on to Journey into Mystery.
Do you like Coletta? Well, then I got good news. We got more Coletta here for you. Journey into Mystery with the Mighty Thor. Go Thunderdod, introducing the indestructible Destroyer, one of Thor's all-time great villains, is introduced in this issue. This cover does not look like it's Coletta to me. This looks like Frank Raig inking this cover. I didn't look it up. Coletta usually inks covers when he inks the inside, but this is an absolutely gorgeous cover of Thor fighting the Destroyer.
Yeah, I think you're right. I was just going to talk about actually the very first panel in this issue. Something that I found interesting and kind of confused me for a moment is the very first line of dialogue is an American soldier saying, "On your toes, Charlie. Enemy aircraft zeroing in at 6 o'clock." And this is in Vietnam. And generally, the Viet Cong were referred to as Victor Charlie, which then ended up just being Charlie. So I was confused for a moment. Like, is he saying that Charlie, as in the Viet Cong, is an aircraft zero? It's like, I don't know whether that had become common parlance among non-veterans at that point. That
Yeah.
anyway, so that just threw me for a moment. So I just wanted to point that out before you get into the swing of things here.
Yeah, so we've got Kill Thunder God. Soldiers are here. Surprisingly, we actually pick up where we left off last issue, where Thor still has the young orphaned Vietnamese girl from last issue. He goes ahead, drops her off with some American soldiers, and takes off. Now it's totally unclear how far he goes here and where the rest of this issue takes place. Someplace where there's a great white hunter, so maybe he's flown to Africa at this point, but it's tremendously unclear.
I assumed it was somewhere else in Southeast Asia or maybe like Papua New Guinea or something like that.
Yeah. So then Thor lands, got the Northern Stones. Meanwhile, Loki is watching him from afar. Loki is like, "Oh, I'm going to set up some sort of trap here." There is some sort of great white hunter with indigenous guides. He then shoots a gas pellet at Thor. Now, this is the second issue in a row where Thor is knocked out and tied up. And once again, in neither issue does he turn back to Don Blake, which he should be doing if he is not holding his hammer. Last issue, they sort of showed it tucked into his waistband, which
No,
was
and
sort of
and
the
and
way
they
to
do that
explain it.
here. But they do that here. It's still around his
Oh,
wrist,
I
both at the
see.
bottom of page 3 and the top of page 4.
Okay, I see. But that still doesn't make any sense. How would they have been able to drag him there if he had his
Shh,
hammer?
shh, shh, shh.
Anyway, so then the Great White Hunter has been looking at various ancient artifacts wherever he is, and it turns out that I guess he is sort of prodded by Loki, who has chosen his cat's paw well, to find a hidden temple hidden behind a rock face. When the smoke clears, when the rubble is stilled, the dazed eyes of the still unsuspecting hunter gaze upon, and he says, "A monstrous temple from some bygone age." And Kirby, of course, is killing it with the temple. Kirby loves to have gigantic stone giants fused together to make some sort of structure. And he is doing that here. And then the Great White Hunter enters, and inside he finds the Destroyer. So the Destroyer is one of Kirby's all-time great visuals. This giant gray metal robot-looking dude who will go on to be one of Thor's main antagonists from this point on. He was the antagonist in the first Thor movie. He was
Which I was shocked and amazed. I was shocked that they did that, and I was amazed by how well they pulled off the visuals in the Thor movie.
they really
You know,
did.
it can be kind of difficult because his face is just basically metal bands, but they really pulled it off well.
They really did. I love the Destroyer in the first Thor movie. So then we get here. Thor wakes up, easily gets out of his ropes. We've got another looking down shot. You were saying you like the looking down shot in Spider-Man. Here we have
Yes.
one on Thor looking down on page 7. That's quite nice. Thor finds the hunter is frozen because his mind has transferred into the Destroyer, and we get the first of many big knockdown Thor Destroyer fights. So it turns out the Destroyer was actually created by Odin and hidden in this cliff many years ago as sort of a fail-safe weapon if all else failed in Asgard. And now Loki seemingly knew all this and led the hunter there to have him take over the destroyer, have him fight Thor, and then Loki just thinks better of it. And Loki is like, "What am I doing? Like, who am I? What am I even doing with my life?" And he's like, "I shouldn't have set this up. This is going to turn out very poorly." I guess he never really wanted to get Thor killed and realizes that the destroyer can kill Thor. We then, speaking of the first Thor movie, he then is like, "I better go confess all to Odin and get Odin to shut this whole thing down." But Odin is in the Odin sleep. which I had not read this comic yet when I saw the first Thor movie. And I thought the first Thor movie invented the Odin sleep, but no, it had not. Read this shortly thereafter and was surprised to see this actually was from the comics. Odin is, of course, in a spectacular bed. He is wearing spectacular footy pajamas.
Yes, I love that that screaming eagle or whatever it is at the foot of the bed that whose wings basically are what holds the mattress in place. It's just fantastic.
It's the equivalent of a race car bed for a
Oh
child,
yes,
but this
yes,
is Odin's screaming eagle bed. And of course, it is a bed for one because Odin does not have a wife until the late 70s comics. So he sleeps in a little twin bed, like any child imagines that all parents do. So then Loki is like, you got to wake him up. I've really screwed up this time. And they're like, sure you have, Loki. We don't believe you. And they toss him in jail. So meanwhile, Thor and Destroyer are beating the crap out of each other. Speaking of another thing that happens in the Thor movies, Destroyer destroys Thor's hammer, just slices it in two, basically. He says,
yeah.
my hammer. He sliced it in two with a blast he's shooting from his fingers. So that is a shocking thing that happened in the third Thor movie. And Thor's like, well, it's okay. I can use the Norn Stones. But nope. Destroyer liquefies the floor and resolidifies it diamond hard while Thor is stuck in it. So now he is held fast. Loki tries to escape, cannot, is bound up even more tightly. The destroyer is
And I've got to say, I love that panel on the top of page 14, the second panel with Loki just frustrated with his fists against the wall. And you just
no,
see just his eyes and his nose as he just has the determination and frustration and anger just emoting from him like nobody's business. Really great.
yes. So then Destroyer sets out to destroy Thor, and the issue ends. So this is quite a cliffhanger for Thor. His hammer has been destroyed. He is fighting the Destroyer, who is clearly a extremely intimidating villain. Odin is in the Odin sleep. Loki is trying to do the right thing, and no one will believe him, and he's all locked up and cannot be more bound more tightly. And that is a hell of a cliffhanger. This is a legendary issue, and it is absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, it's good stuff. But one thing that just now occurred to me is if his hammer is destroyed, does that just like invalidate the whole 60-second thing? Like, is that enchantment part of the hammer? I don't know.
I don't know.
And then just, we were talking about the Coletta thing. Page 9, panel 5. I have no clue what is going on with the perspective. Is that supposed to be a dome behind him, or is that some sort of alcove? It is completely lost. The dimensionality of that whole thing is completely lost, which is very much the anchor's responsibility. And
Yep.
it just makes no sense visually.
Indeed, it does not. It is a shame.
I noticed that the hunter, when he finds Thor, thinks to himself, Thor, the greatest prize of all to any hunter. Like, so hunters are just out there like, oh man, if I ever see Thor, I would love to have his head up on the wall of my man cave.
Speaking going in Hunter's house and just got for his severed head mounted on the wall.
Exactly.
As I put in my notes, so much of the original Thor trilogy is based on this issue. It is great. So then we just have a quick Tales of Asgard storyline. I failed to point out when we talked about Fantastic Four, Doom was wearing nice special goggles at one point.
Mhm.
And here we have the second pair of awesome Kirby goggles of the month. Thor and Loki were sent out on a quest last issue. So first, Thor is going to a special map maker who has an awesome pair of goggles, who is making a map for them and says, "Oh, by the way, I've also got a glove that makes anybody tell the truth. So I'll give you that too." Thor is like, "Okay." And he's very, by the way, the map maker is very careful not to touch that glove himself, which is like, he's got tongs for handling it. Okay, map maker, we trust you. Then Loki says, "Hey, I've got someone who's going to come on the trip with us." And Thor's like, "Great, I'll shake his hand wearing this special glove I just got." And as soon as Thor shakes the guy's hand, he says, "I wish thee naught but harm, unsuspecting one. Once we set sail, I shall smite thee from behind and slay thee." What? What have I said? And Thor says, "The truth, thou base assassin." And Thor then fights the guy, beats him up. And he's like, Loki, that was the guy you wanted to send with us. Why don't I shake your hand while wearing this thing? And Loki's like, nope, I'm noping out of here. Time enough for a hand clasping later. Now there is much work to be done. I must not waste a minute. And he gets out of there. And then they head off on their quest. And we get just a gorgeous panel on the bottom of
Oh
page
yeah.
5 as we've got a flying ship taking off in the background. And in the foreground, a horn blarer to beat all horn blarers, very similar to something out of Dr. Seuss, where he has a massive horn that is stretching its way across the panel as he is blaring that they are about to take off on their quest. I love this Tales of Asgard. They're doing a good job, as they're doing with Doctor Strange, of giving little mini stories within a larger quest. Whether you want to say that those are similar because they're both written by Stan Lee, or whether you want to say it's just coincidence because they're not being written by Stan Lee, that's up to you.
Yeah, so on page 5, panel 2, what is going on with that big thing that so the map maker has some sort of little what looks like an extruder or something like that, and he's pulling a lever, and it looks like out is coming some sort of tangle of vines, and there's looks what looks like a head at the top of it with eyes. And I'm just like, I kept on staring at that, like, what did I miss? Was there something like, is that the map or something? But no, I have no idea what's going on. Also, in that fantastic, spectacular panel on the bottom of page 5, I will say that Coletta completely made the mouth of the horn, or the bell of the horn, I guess you would call it, look completely flat.
Yeah.
Just did not pull that off well at all. But overall, a good story.
Yes, an excellent story. I love that we have begun the massive epic era of Tales of Asgard. We are off to a good start.
Yeah. All right. I guess it's time now to move on to Strange Tales. And this is a momentous issue.
Yes, indeed. We've talked before. We had the Kirby Apocalypse, where we had the month where Kirby left most of the Marvel books, and we've had various apocalypses since then. And this month, we get to the Bad Book Apocalypse, where
Yeah.
we have Marvel's two worst books. I'm going to go ahead and call it Marvel's two worst books. Come
Well,
to
well, two
an end.
they're two worst features because
There are two
they're
worst
both, yeah,
features.
yeah.
There's two worst features, half of each of which takes up half of an otherwise good book, are both come to an end this month. So we have our final tale of the Human Torch and Thing as a solo feature, or in this case, duo feature in Strange Tales, and our last Giant Man Wasp over in Tales to Astonish. It makes me really sad because these have been such great books and I'm going to miss them so much. And oh, who am
Oh,
I kidding? No, this is wonderful news. They're both terrible books.
they
It
really,
is,
really are.
although I think we discussed this issue many, many months ago in a much
Yes.
earlier episode of this podcast, and you were going like, "Oh, that was an especially bad one," and I'm like, "No, I like that one." So I do like this issue.
All right.
I There's things I like about this issue. I'll jump in and point those out. I think that Human Torch and Thing are going out on a high note here, but you do not.
Well, and both of these features, which are ending, the final chapters are drawn by Bob Powell in this case.
Yes.
But in this case, it's actually inked by Wally Wood. Well, it says soul stirring script by Stan Lee, breathtaking art by Bob Powell, eye popping inking by Wallace Wood, heart rending lettering by Artie Simek. And I'm kind of wondering whether Wally, with his whole idea that is like, wow, this whole Marvel method thing is just a way to rip off the artists and have them do Stan Lee's work for him, as Wally clearly thought. If this might have been like, hey, can you just give me some inking work? Because that way I know I won't have to also be writing your books for you. Just speculation on my part. So the Watcher shows up and he's like, I need the Fantastic Four. And Ben and Johnny are just like, oh, well, Reed and Sue are out doing wedding stuff. It's like, all right, I guess I'll just stick with the two of you. Not like I've got the power to go out and grab them as well. But I guess we're stuck with this.
Yeah,
So
the Watcher should be able to find anybody, but he says, then I have no choice. I must offer the challenge to the two of you alone, although the chances of your survival will be sorely against you. And it's like, clearly not happy with his slim pickings here.
you
But
you had many other options. The Watcher starts telling a tale of how Kang has returned to the days of King Arthur, taken over Camelot, basically, and his whole point is to change history so that his enemies, such as the Fantastic Four and the Avengers, will never come to be. Which just really seems like a weird plot. I mean, it just
yes,
I don't know. I just don't get it. I don't know. I don't get it.
no, it
We
makes no sense. But I
yeah.
always like King Arthur stories. I'm currently catching up with Prince Valiant right now. I fell behind in my Prince Valiant reading, and I'm reading the stories from the '60s. I love them. I really like Powell and Wood's Merlin here. I love
Yes.
him conjuring things in the bottom page 2. I really love the first panel of page 3, where Merlin is conjuring and winds are whipping around him. But then Kang on the second panel of page 3 starts whipping his own arms around and sending Merlin's lightning back to him. I think those are just gorgeous panels. I really like Pal and Witt's art in this issue.
I find page 3, panel 2 to be quite silly looking. Kang looks like he's prancing about rather than using some kind of technology. But yes, Merlin is well rendered, and we have determined, have we not, that this is actually a different character from the Merlin that showed up in the early issue of Thor? Don't they later determine that, oh yeah, that was some other character just claiming to be Merlin or something like that?
Something like that.
Yeah. All right. So Merlin has been captured and imprisoned by Kang. Kang is then able to take over Camelot. And we see a bunch of stuff with Kang in medieval times. Well, of course, I, as someone who is a medieval history major and have always been a fan of the Arthurian myths, there's always the question of, is Arthur in late antiquity? Is it in medieval times? It can always be quite, yeah. Anyway,
Well,
so
and there's, I mean, it's sort of standard. Rereading this Hal Foster Prince Valiant, I think going all the way back to Mallory, there's a sense of like, well, the King Arthur stories are set in the year 500, except for with the castles of the year 1200. And you just take the castles and knights and horses and armor of the year 1200, and you send them all back to the year 500, and then you've got the Arthurian myths.
oh man, is that Kang? Did Kang do that?
Yes. Kang,
He's
yeah,
the
this will forever be explained by Kang's meddling.
Kang came from like the what he says 25th century here. I think sometimes other times they say 30th century. One way or the other, he's got this fantastic super technology from the future, and instead he is creating like a multi arrow bow and a better catapult and a stilts and some sort of really unwieldy looking servo type arms for a knight. It's just like, seriously, dude? I mean, you can't bring any other better technology to this. So at this point, Ben and Johnny are finally sent there by the Watcher after hearing all this being described to them, and they get to have lots of fun fights with medieval stuff. We get to see the absolutely ridiculous knight on stilts here, and of course, this is just the month after Stiltman was created by Wally Wood. But no, it just that thing looks utterly ridiculous. Horses do not fare well in this
No, they
issue
do not.
when it comes to the thing. Um, so after Johnny has freed Merlin, the battle starts to turn in the good guy's favor. And so on the page 10, first panel, Thing is picking up a horse, it looks like by the crotch, and the knight is still on it. The horse looks terrified.
Yes.
And then he clearly launches the horse off. And it looks like the horse ends up landing and running off in the distance, but I mean, come on. No, he doesn't. And then the next page, I think, yes, Kang is trying to make off on a horse, and Thing tackles it. And once again, the horse just looks like
Nonplussed.
oof. No, exactly. Which just all reminds me of Blazing Saddles.
Yes.
So in the end, the Watcher returns these two back to the Baxter building, and then Reed and Sue return from whatever pre-wedding business they had, and they're like, look at them lolling around like a pair of loafers. Is that what all you've got to do while I'm away? It's just, one of these hackneyed old things where, oh, I've just saved the earth. And then it's like, oh, what are you doing all day? Anyway,
And
so
then there's no acknowledgement, unlike the Chime Man, where they actually do say, like, that may be the last you ever see a Chime Man. Here, there's no acknowledgement that this is the end of this feature. Yes, and we end on something that has been done, I think, more than once before in this feature of Reed and Sue seeing Johnny at the end of his adventure and assuming he's just being lazy. They're like, okay, we will end as we began. We will end as we have done so many times before. We'll end on a tired old ending. And as this strip limps to its death.
it's well deserved and long awaited death.
Yes. I love that Kang. So, first of all, Kang is like, I'm going to go back and take over King Arthur's thing with my 30th century technology. And then he's like, well, first, he takes control of King Arthur's army fair and square through a series of jousting tournaments. And it's like, well, you don't have to play fair and square here. You've got 30th century technology. And then, like, what about tanks? What about just 20th century
Right,
technology?
right.
Like, why not bring a whole boatload of tanks back to the 5th century or 6th century or whenever these things are taking place? And wouldn't they
Exactly.
be rather impressed with those? But No, they do not have them.
They've just got giant stilts.
Another thing we have happened in this issue, which has happened so many times before, Ben and Johnny are fighting together, and then Johnny realizes, like, oh, I should go to the castle and free Merlin. And of course, Ben is like, well, I'll be discombobulated. The kid's running out on me. He never did anything like that before. Ben is, of course, completely convinced that Johnny is a coward. I'd have staked my life on that kid. What made him do it? What made him run out on me? And it's like, do we have to do this? This is such a lame early Marvel thing to bring back of the constantly assuming each other are cowards. As I say in my notes, a nice farewell to a bad strip would have saved Powell if only he'd penciled it. If Wally Wood had penciled this issue, it
Oh
would
yeah.
have been gorgeous.
Yes. Yes, I wholeheartedly agree on that. And I'd actually forgotten I had some visual notes here on some of this stuff. At one point, Merlin is saying, "No, you must not. If you change the past," and of course, this is current time for Merlin, "it will destroy the future. All who live in the centuries that follow may perish." It's like, uh, they to you they don't live yet. Anyway. Although I guess that in TH White's version was living backwards and so had lived through all that time. I'd forgotten that. Yes, in TH White's version, he was living backwards and had lived through the 20th century and was then moving backwards in time. So in that case, I guess this actually would be a valid thing for him to be afraid of. I'd forgotten that. Right. And by changing the past, I will gain revenge on my enemies in the 20th century. Again, you could just leave the 20th century alone, dude. It doesn't matter. Enemies such as the Fantastic Four, because they cannot exist once the past has been altered. Okay.
This is,
Um,
of course, before we know about chaos theory. Now we know that even just setting foot in the past would alter the future. But instead,
right.
he thinks he's got to, really take control of this army and really, make major changes to the past in order to alter the future. There's we don't have the butterfly effect yet.
Yes. So let's move on to better things within this same issue. We're going to do Doctor Strange, Master of the Mystic Arts, Earth Be My Battleground, written by Marvel's own living legend Stan Lee. So Steve Ditko is not getting plotting credit on this at this point.
He will soon. In a couple of months, he'll be getting full punning credit on both Spider-Man and Doctor Strange. But
Yes.
there's a couple of months here where he's getting punning credit on Spider-Man, but not Doctor Strange.
It's illustrated by Marvel's own unsung genius, Steve Ditko, lettered by Marvel's own beaming pixie, Artie Simek. We see Doctor Strange finally getting home after his interdimensional troubles, and we have, just a mix of the two greatest strengths of Steve Ditko in one splash page here, in that
Yes.
we see, the whole mystic dimensions that he is passing through, and you see him passing through all these weird mystic objects or other worlds or whatever they might be into the thunderstorming noir New York City. Ditko's just showboating at this point.
Yes.
Come on, buddy. We have some fantastic pictures of Strange getting into disguise as just a regular guy with a trench coat and a fedora, hiding out in a seedy motel so that he can then send his astral form out. So it turns out that the Ancient One is getting weaker, but he can apparently somehow give him more strength with the Eye of Agamotto, even in his ectoplasmic form. He also apparently has the ability to make his ectoplasmic form invisible even to other ectoplasmic beings, which he does, but then he undoes that to see the Ancient One and to talk to his disciple, and then forgets to put it back on. Oopsie. And so Mordo now knows where he is, sends all of his ectoplasmic goons after him. Clea sees that Dormammu is sending all of his power through this mystic window in order to power Mordo to kill Strange. We once again just get some fantastic visuals of the Dark Dimension. And so Clea has a plan and she's heading off. We'll see what the plan is in a minute. So we have just some fantastic scenes of Strange battling this whole army of ectoplasmic goons, and of course, being completely non corporeal. They go to every part of the Earth. They're like in what looks like India at one point, and then they're like passing through a cargo ship and then passing through a shark. And it's just really fantastic stuff. So now we find what Clea's plan was. She is going to free the mindless ones to give Dormammu something else to worry about. So she's got some sort of gadget that does this, and the mindless ones break out. And Dormammu is like, "Wait, what? I've got some stuff I need to do. Mordo, you're on your own." And Mordo's like, "Wait, we have him. I need your. Come on."
Yes, if
So,
there's one thing we know about Dormammu that we found out in his first appearance, it's that he considers stopping the mindless ones more important than fighting Doctor Strange, which is
yes.
how Doctor Strange managed to defeat him the first time and is now coming back here.
Yes. Back to Doctor Strange and the army of ectoplasmic goons. They pass through a passenger plane at one point now, and then out into space. And you see that space has very little meaning for them because they're out at the moon almost immediately. Doctor Strange is actually heading into the heart of the sun, which apparently, because of all the fusion reactions, can actually have some sort of effect on their ectoplasmic cells. Okay, I'll buy that. Why not?
It's just
Huh?
science. It's just science.
No, it's just magic.
It's just super it's just the supernatural.
It's just super
Apparently,
science magic.
it's just super magic science. It's you just got to go with it.
Yes. So Doctor Strange is just going to be fearless and plunge into the heart of the sun, even though it might kill him, it might not. And Mordo blinks. He does not have the intestinal fortitude to follow Doctor Strange into the heart of the sun. So Doctor Strange returns to Earth in a path that will be different from the one that Mordo takes. How different it can be seems a little dubious to me, but let's just go ahead and accept it. So Doctor Strange is able to return to give the Ancient One a little more strength. We meanwhile see that Dormammu has re-encaged the mindless ones. Dormammu is absolutely furious at Mordo that Mordo wasn't able to seal the deal. And Clea is now worried that eventually Dormammu will figure out that she's the one who freed the mindless ones. Of course, at this point, we only know of her and Dormammu in this dimension, so that's not much of a mystery. But we will eventually find out there are more beings here.
We
Uh,
did see one other dude last issue. We saw some other Dark Dimension dude
okay.
last issue.
Okay. Doctor Strange returns to his corporeal body and goes walking out into the mean streets of New York with the thunderstorm still going on.
Now on the search for eternity, as I lose myself in the night, as I begin the search for eternity. So he now has one word to go on.
Right, I'd forgotten to mention that when he went to the Ancient One was still unconscious, but he was like muttering eternity, eternity. So Doctor Strange has no idea what he's talking about, but he's like, okay, this must be important. I have my next mission as part of this big long epic.
Yes.
So once again, Steve Ditko able to exercise his two greatest strengths at one time in this issue. And we continue this nice epic, getting away from the little side plot that we had in the previous issue or two and back to the main event. And it is a visual feast, well worth the whole 12 cents if you did not like the first half of the book.
Yes. Absolutely beautiful. Absolutely wonderful story. Good escalation of the story to have now this one mysterious word from Doctor Strange, which of course would then become a major plot point in Thor: Love and Thunder, of all places, that is also about the search for eternity. Reusing this plot unexpectedly there. I thought it was funny when Doctor Strange is in the sun, they want to show that a bunch of fusion reactions are going on, so they just have these giant atoms.
I'm going to be science nerd a number of times during this month. This is one of them. In the sun, there really aren't that many atoms that have that many electrons around them.
True.
The sun is almost entirely hydrogen with, the secondary amount being helium. There are trace elements of pretty much everything in there, but, most of them are just going to have one electron floating around. So, I mean, I got over it. I moved on. It's a minor a minor thing. It gets the point across. We get it. But yeah, part of me is like, excuse me while I push up my glasses. That is not the kind. Anyway, yeah.
I did like how Clea has, I think for the first time, puffy shoulders, which when Paul Smith is then drawing the book in the 80s, he is, of course, like, it is the 80s and I am into these puffy shoulders. I'm going to bring those back. This is a wonderful issue. I love it.
So I think this brings us to the end of this episode. See, I remembered this time.
You did. Yeah, I think these were four pretty great issues. We've got a pretty lopsided month because we've got 2 Ditko stories, 3 Kirby stories, if you include Tale of Asgard, and even the Bob Powell stories inked by Wallywood. I think this is a pretty great first half of this month.
I cannot argue. So I guess we should sign off and then sign right back on again to do the next episode. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Always means a lot to us. Please rate and review us. And as I've been saying since 2020, stay safe out there.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, everybody. We will see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Marvel Reread Club. Please subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. Your reviews and ratings are a great help and always appreciated. We love hearing from you. Go to MarvelRereadClub.com to find notes and join the discussion about this episode. We're also on Facebook and Instagram. See you next time.